Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, morning, evening, whatever time you are watching this presentation. This is Dr. Renee, and this is the week number 4 of Fundamentals of Epi and Biostatistics. We're going to look at the very classic case that every epidemiology student is introduced to in their studies, and that is the John Snow cholera investigation case. So this gentleman right here is Jon Snow, not Jon Snow from the Game of Thrones, but John Snow from England. He was a very studious guy. He was very observant of the world around him. He was just smart guy. He looked at things differently. And you had to. This is in an age when germ theory has not come about, and people don't know that it's germs that cause disease, and people think that it's bad air or miasma that is calling or that is causing, I'm sorry, diseases. And this is a time when London, England was one of the biggest cities in the world, if not the biggest. 2.7 million residents in this part of the world in England, on the island of Great Britain. And you see the river goes right through it. And, this is a case where many cities around the world that you build them around rivers. Washington, D.C. is right on the Potomac, right? New York City on the Hudson, etc. So that is kind of an issue when it comes to sanitation, because if a lot of people get their water from the river and they dump the sewer into the river, you can imagine that you're going to have issues. So what is cholera? Cholera is a bacterial disease caused by Vibrio cholerae. It's a gram-negative rod, so it looks red when you do the gram stain. Gram stain is a method that we use in the lab to identify bacteria. It is motile, and you can see the little tails of it. And right there, you can see the little tails, and that helps it move. So yeah, it moves, not very fast, but it does move, and that actually helps it um, be infectious and move from one place to another within your body and from one place to another in the water. It likes brackish water, so water that is not too salty, not too sweet. In the lab, we use Kerry Blair media to transport it from one place to another, and we use thiosulfate citrate bile salts to isolate it and then identify it. So if you get a sample from a patient that you're thinking it's cholera or any of the other vibrios, you put it in different plates and it'll grow in different media, right? Kerry Blair. But if it grows on TCBS, then you know that it is a vibrio, and then you can do a couple more tests to see that it is cholera. Of course, that this is the old-fashioned way. This is the way that you do it in most developing countries. In developed nations, you can throw it on a PCR machine and determine that the genes are there for the Vibrio cholerae, and that's a positive. That's a PCR test. Remember when we talked previously about case definitions? So these are a couple of the case definitions of cholera: a suspected case and a confirmed case. So suspected is in a place that cholera outbreak has not been declared, and they're presenting with severe acute watery diarrhea, severe dehydration, or they died from acute watery diarrhea. And in places where there is a cholera outbreak, then any person presenting with dying from an acute watery, presenting with or dying from an acute watery diarrhea. And so, there's no component of time here. It's kind of hidden in there. It's in areas where a cholera outbreak, so that's a place, has not been declared. That's kind of the time right there. So if you declare an epidemic, then you basically are saying since the epidemic started. And if you're not declaring it, then that the time component gets a little tricky, right? And then there's a confirmed case definition. So big hint for you is that when you do suspect cases and you go to confirmed cases, you're going from broad case definitions to more specific case definitions. Big hint. So as you saw in the case definition, cholera causes profuse watery diarrhea, sometimes described as rice water stools. If you just let it go uncontrolled, you can lose up to 20 liters of fluids. These beds will often have a hole in them because people are so weak that they cannot get up and go to the bathroom. So they just have a hole so they can just empty their bowels into a bucket below. And what you do is that you keep giving them IV fluids, in some cases antibiotics, but a lot of IV fluids, if they can tolerate it by drinking, great, because then they can take in more fluids that way. But you do IVs if they're too weak. Vomiting, thirst, obviously, because you're emptying yourself out. Leg cramps, obviously, because you're losing all those electrolytes in the diarrhea. Restlessness or irritability, you see this in kids, right? They don't feel right. Obviously, they're losing a lot of water. Dehydration, with all the symptoms of dehydration that go with it. And the incubation period is from 2 hours to 5 days. So 20 liters, you divide that by four, and you get about 5 gallons of losing fluids. That's a lot of fluid. That is just a lot of water. Normally, you take in about half a gallon or 2 liters of water in a day. If it's a hot day, you can probably get to 3 or 4 liters, depending on how much you're working out and how much you're sweating. This is a phenomenal amount of water, and that's why you die. You basically dehydrate. What the cholera does is that it has a toxin that in your intestines, instead of the water going from the large intestine into your bloodstream, it reverses that. And so all of a sudden, your bloodstream is delivering water into the large intestine to try to get rid of the bacteria, actually. And then it does its thing. There was a case in Peru. So the Americas was free of cholera for the longest time, and then the seventh cholera pandemic, which we are still in. So those of you who are alive right now, you're living in the COVID pandemic and the cholera pandemic and the HIV pandemic. Congratulations, I guess. There was a case in Peru before cholera came back to the Americas. It was gone for about 100 years, where a ship docked in Peru, in the port of Lima, Peru, and dumped its waste, its sewage, and people who were on the ship were sick with cholera. It went into the ship's sewage. It got into the water, and unfortunately, it started spreading through the Americas again. Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, and then Argentina to the south, Brazil to the east, and then it moved up to Colombia, Central America, Mexico, the Caribbean, and there were even some cases in the U.S. And in fact, there was a plane that took off from Argentina and it landed in Peru to load more passengers, and it loaded food and water from there. And on en route back to L.A., several people got sick with symptoms. Again, 2 hours to 5 days. So, people on the flight got symptoms and landed in LA. And then the people whose incubation period was a little bit longer went home, got other people sick, and there were hundreds of cases around LA. And then it started spreading. Even a lot of cases in the U.S. as well, contained because of water treatment. But it really got out of hand throughout the rest of the Americas. It's now been controlled again, but then there was another epidemic in Haiti after the big earthquake there a few years back. So the pandemic continues. So as I said, we're now in the seventh cholera pandemic. This is an interesting paper. You can point your phones and look at it, or you can look at the link right there. Again, I talked about Peru cholera outbreak, the earthquake outbreak after the earthquake, where UN peacekeeping forces came to Haiti to help out, and unfortunately, some of them from Nepal had cholera, and they set up their latrines next to a river, which was a source of water for nearby towns, and that began a rather large cholera epidemic. So this is very much an issue in places where raw sewage mixes with drinking water, in places where drinking water is not secure. And you can imagine many places around the world still do not have potable water. And so those places are prone to outbreaks of waterborne diseases, cholera being one of the worst. So, like I told you at the beginning, before John Snow and the work of Pasteur, the theory was that bad air caused disease. That you breathed in bad air, and that's what made you sick from all sorts of things: tuberculosis, cholera, malaria. In fact, malaria means bad air in Latin. And so the first microscope didn't come around until the 1500s, and then it wasn't until the 1600s that the magnification allowed for Hooke to make drawings of these bacteria that he was seeing. In 1670, Van Leeuwenhoek then discovers the bacteria based off of Hooke's drawing. So Hooke was drawing cells and structures, and then Van Leeuwenhoek took a look and was like, I think that this is actually an organism. And he discovered bacteria, but the association between those bacteria and disease didn't come along until the 1850s, 1860s. Based on John Snow's observations, based on his paper that proves that water transmits cholera, and based on Louis Pasteur's confirmation. So this is This on the right is the experiment that Louis Pasteur carried out. If he heated up a broth, a nutrient broth, and let it sit still, but it had this long neck that did not allow things to fall into it, nothing would grow. If he and I apologize, there's a background noise from the cats. If he applied heat, but he broke off the neck and that allowed bacteria to fall in, then that caused bacteria to be present. And then the last one is if he heated to kill everything in there, tilted it sideways and touched something, and then tilted it back, bacteria would be present. So he proved that bacteria did not come from nowhere. Bacteria came from somewhere, and this disproved the miasma theory and the theory that spontaneous generation of bacteria, like it came from somewhere. And so he proved germ theory. So the London cholera epidemic, it started in August of 1854 and lasted for a couple of months. There were between 500 and 600 deaths in 10 days in the city, so a lot of deaths. If you remember the epidemic curves, another hint, this one went up and then down right away. A lot of people got sick, and John Snow noticed that the deaths were clustered in space around Broad Street. He collected data via interviews and death registries. He convinced the local authorities to remove the pump, and that's probably, although there is some debate about this, that is probably what caused the epidemic to die down. Others say that so many people got infected so quickly that it ran out of hosts, and that's another thing that brings epidemics to an end. The epidemic died down afterward. There were other epidemics after that, but then people, especially the authorities, they knew what to do. Just look at where people were sick and get rid of the water source and have them get water from a clean water source, and that would help. So this is a map that John Snow worked on. And as you can see, he was going around and he was tallying the number of cases in houses. So this house here in the center had one case. This one had four. 1, 3, 2. And he noticed that the clustering of the cases was right around Broad Street, and it was right around the pump, right? He also drew an outline of the district that, or the places where the people got their water from the pump. It was more or less this line around here, and that really helped understand that it was the pump that was causing the disease. So there was a workhouse right here where men worked. He noticed that not a lot of them were getting sick. So what's going on? Well, that's because they were either drinking beer, which was treated and the alcohol would kill the bacteria, or they drank tea, which was heated up, and that would kill the bacteria. Or they were getting their water from another water source. He did notice that people far away from the pump would also get sick. And when asked, they said, "Oh, they prefer the taste of the water on Broad Street." So they were getting their water still from that pump, and so this is how this was going. Again, very fast. It moved very fast. That incubation period is actually, hours to it's hours to days, but it's really hours. And so a lot of people were getting sick very quickly. At the time, you can imagine, medicine was not what it is today, so rehydration was nearly impossible, and you were probably rehydrating with water with even more bacteria. And if you were otherwise healthy, you would still fall ill to this, and a lot of fatal cholera cases. So this is the epidemic curve, and so hint for your quizzes and your exams. What does it look like? Is it propagated? Is it point source? Is it continuous? Right, up, down, right away. And again, these are the number of cases. These are the deaths. It looks kind of the same, right? Up, down. You see, this is the debate about the handle, because it got removed here, and then yes, cases go down afterward, but they were already going down before that. So that's why there is some debate as to whether or not the handle helped. It must have helped in some way, right? You get rid of the source anyway. Even if cases were going down, you're probably preventing secondary cases. You're probably preventing those people who would come to the Broad Street pump to get the water from outside the area from getting sick. So one of the things here is that observers is expected, right? John Snow did some other analysis of other outbreaks of cholera before the one in London. And so he he noticed the trends, and then he noticed the attack rate, right? And we talked about the attack rate, the number of people exposed, the number of people sick divided by the number of people exposed. And attack rates are fairly constant for diseases, especially if the disease doesn't mutate, like the flu or COVID-19. And he said, the workhouse in Pollen Street is more than three-fourths surrounded by houses in which deaths from cholera occurred. Yet out of 535 inmates, only 5 died of cholera, the other deaths which took place being those of persons admitted after they were attacked. The workhouse has a pump well on the premises. That was another reason I forgot to mention. In addition to the supply from the Grand Junction Waterworks, and the inmates never sent to the Broad Street pump for water. If the mortality rate in the workhouse had been equal to that in the streets, attack rate, mortality rate, those remain constant between diseases. Then upwards of 100 persons in the workhouse would have died, not just the 5. So he started this whole trend in epidemiology of observed versus expected. And when we notice that something is more or less, we have to investigate. If there's more or less observed than what is expected, we have to investigate, because we need to find out what's going on. Is there an epidemic going on when there's more than what is expected? And what went well, or what is preventing people from getting sick or dying when there's less than what is expected? So that's something that we do in epidemiology all the time. John Snow also pioneered the comparison of rates. So look at the water companies. If it was Lambeth, Southwark, and Vauxhall, sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, but if it was these 3 water companies giving the water, and there were sources at the Thames didn't, and Battersea rivers or creeks, this was the death rate per 100,000. So he understood that you had to control for population size. If it was Southwark and Vauxhall, Thames and Battersea, then the rate was slightly higher. And if it was Southwark, Vauxhall, and Kent, Thames, Battersea, Ravensbourne, and Ditches and Wells, then it was really high, 107, right? So what did he notice from here? And this is, again, another hint for more quizzes and in the midterm. Which were the water companies that were likely to be causing the problem? Which were the sources of supply? So Lambeth, Southwark, Vauxhall. Southwark, Vauxhall, Southwark, Vauxhall, Kent. So it looks like Southwark, Vauxhall, right? Not Kent and not Lambeth. And it looks like getting the water at the Thames and Battersea is the main sources of this. And you see the addition of the ditches and wells. that probably didn't help things either. But this was the kind of observational epidemiology that he pioneered. And then again, if it was the districts, the population, the deaths from cholera, the cholera deaths, and again, Southwark and Vauxhall had the highest, right? If it was both, then it was 60, and if it was just Lambeth, then 0. And this is one company by itself, by the way. Sorry if in the previous slide I made it seem like it was 2 companies, but Southwark and Vauxhall is the name of one company. If it's both, it's high. If it's just Lambeth, it's nothing. So it must be Southwark and Vauxhall that is causing all the issues. So this is a study. This is the observational study, one of the first ones to be done, and well documented. Maybe there were others that were done, but they're not as well documented and so lost to history. But this is how we started to understand concepts of a spatial analysis in the map, right? We started to understand concepts of observed versus expected, of comparison of rates. Notice here, there's comparison of rates, yes, but it's not experimental because John Snow had nothing to do with who was getting the water and who wasn't. He let it just play out, and that makes it observational. Had he been randomizing people into one water well or another, then it would be experimental, and we'll touch on those topics later on. But this is purely observational. This is what set epidemiology in motion, not only with the microbiology of understanding diseases caused by bacteria, but with the analysis of numbers to better understand that. So another hint for another question on the exams and the quizzes. So this is the end of the first quarter of the course. You made it through four lectures so far. Congratulations. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you have the discussion forum, or go ahead and email me. I will be holding office hours, so there was a poll that I sent out for office hours and what works best for you guys. So go ahead and answer that poll. I will set up office hours at least once a week going forward, especially towards the midterm. I'm going to have a big presentation for the midterm to prepare you for that, because I know that a lot of questions come up between now and then. I will touch on the things that I've seen in the quizzes so far that have caused people trouble. There's a couple of questions there that almost everybody's getting wrong, and I'll clarify those concepts. If you have questions, let me know and I will address them as well. And then the other thing is we're gonna start moving into R. So I'm gonna be posting some videos from well-known and respected people on YouTube who are doing good work in explaining R, because the way that I explain it could be different than the way that you understand it, and the way that they explain it could be the way that it works for you. So I'll do that. I'll be posting some videos of my own, creating data sets, analyzing data sets, doing simple statistics, and then I'll start posting some videos about statistical concepts. So that's the biostatistics. I know the book covers some of them at a very broad, very general level, and that's good. Again, you're not going to be an expert in biostatistics. You're going to be exposed to them. This is intro, after all. This is not the actual biostatistics course. So with that, thank you so much. Congratulations on getting through week 4, and we have 4 more weeks before the midterm, and then we'll keep at it. Thank you so much for your time, and take care, and I'll talk to you next week.